Hey, welcome back. I'm Brendan. This is another episode of Views on Brews from my German beer unboxing. And right now I'm about to crack open Oettinger, I don't know how you pronounce it, but let's say it's Oettinger Hefeweizen beer from Germany. Okay, so about Hefeweizen. Hefe is H-E-F-E is just the German word for yeast, and Hefeweizen beer is wheat. So that's just a yeast and wheat beer. Now, all of these yeast and wheat beers, they also contain barley a lot of the time, usually in equal proportions, or at least 50% anyway of wheat and the rest probably barley. But you'll find there's different sort of variations of that as well. Okay, so this brewery has been around since 1731. So one of the newer traditional breweries in Germany. Mark Original, Oettinger Hefeweizen Naturub, traditional beer, and yeah, it doesn't say much else on it. No back label. 4.9% beer. It's going to be a Hefeweizen beer. So Hefeweizen beers are all about the yeast. It's all about the esters from the yeast and the phenolic sort of clovey, sort of banana-y, whatever they've decided to try and pull from their yeast. A lot of German beers are made to accentuate their yeast profile and the malt profile to back it up. So wheat beers have that sort of doughy sweetness to them. And if you add in a really nice yeast to complement that, you can end up with a really great beer. Now, Hefeweizen isn't a style that I drink a lot of because I find the flavour quite strong. But at the same time, I love all German beers. So let's give this a crack and see what it's like. A little bit of a hiss going on. It looks fairly clear here, but I'm sure it will be cloudy. In a minute, we're going to see, is it bottle conditioned, which I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Look, it's pouring fairly clear. And another one of my terrible beer pours, but we'll carry on anyway for an elongated beer pour session. Densely compact, white, shaving foam, thick bubbles. I mean, it's actually left a dent in the foam where I was pouring. It's that heavy on the carbonation, or on the stability of the foam. Stability in the foam on the head of a beer is interesting because for a 4.9% beer, that's not easy to achieve. But what makes it so is the protein in the wheat malt used when they've brewed the beer. And a lot of beers that don't contain wheat, they'll use things like carapils, or something like a crystal malt, something that has unfermentable sugar in it that will translate to keeping it ahead for a lot longer. I've got it in this lovely, tall, slender looking glass. That's something the Germans created to accentuate the carbonation coming up. The bubbles just keep coming up. It's a mild carbonation, but it doesn't stop. It's persistent. Now, the head on this just looks fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Sometimes I think about the head on a beer. Does it even matter? But it does, because it drinks that smooth creaminess. You take a bit of the feeling on, you know, when we talk about aromas, you're talking about, you know, it might taste pineapple, tropical, banana, whatever. When you talk about taste, you're talking about a sensation. You know, you've got the 5 tastes, but you've also got a sensation when you're drinking it. So when you drink it, it's a combination of the aroma, the taste, and how it actually feels on the palate. And so the foam on the top of the beer, for me, is really important. Less important per style. You know, sour beers, I'd expect none. So anyway, fairly densely compact. It's got a very slight haze on it, but you can still see through it. Mild bit of clarity. I wonder. I'm going to do something that Some people don't like to do this, but I really do. I'm going to actually get some of that Hefeweizen yeast going on in there. It is a bottle conditioned beer. I looked in the bottom, I can see the yeast that's settled at the bottom. This is more like what you'd receive it as if you were going to a bar in Germany. They'd be proud of the head that they've created on their beer. And what an absolute whopper of a head on this beer. That's so good. Now, fair play, prost to German brewing. What a great example of why the Germans are so amazing at brewing beer. Even if you don't like the style, you have to appreciate it. If I was poured that, I'd just be bowled over by how, you know, it's almost like an ice cream float or something. You know, that head is going nowhere. Anyway, very cloudy now, very, very cloudy, and it's going all the way through it. So I've got a good bit of the yeast in it, so I'm going to get a good bit of yeast character, all the better for it. Here's a bit of my daily nutrition. Cheers, prost, sláinte, all that good stuff. Wow, great drinkability to this beer. Nowhere near as thick and malty and heavy as some of the German beers that you might get. They're like a liquid meal. This has a medium, perfectly medium body to it. It's not in any way as heavy as the coloration of the beer would suggest. This is poured, you know, you could pour a bottle of this and if it didn't have foam in it, you might say it looked like orange juice. So okay, yeah, beautiful appearance. The aromas, let's check out the aromas. There is a slight mild spiciness to the aroma of this beer. Is it clovey? It very much is clove-like. So they're nailing the characteristics of a Hefeweizen beer. Beautiful yeast character. Sometimes if you're not sure what yeast character should be like, it's everything else that you can't pick out in a beer is the way I feel about it anyway. So I know what hops, the smell of hops or the aroma of hops is like. I know what the aroma of malt is like. It's usually along the bread scale, all the way from dough making to burnt toast. Bready, sort of burnt, crusty, Maillard, caramel, toffee, dark chocolate, ashen, acridness is like. I know all of those things. So if you know what hops are like, and if you know what malt is like, and you know that there's only water and yeast are the other things in it, assuming your water's got a pretty neutral style profile, everything else that you must be tasting is the yeast. The esters that you get, the ester profiles that you get from yeast have been cultivated over decades of use within breweries to the point where the yeast has changed. It's been manipulated by breweries. You know, that's why you have house yeasts and why you have yeasts that have risen to the top. And those yeasts, those characteristics from the yeast have been pulled out from breweries, from laboratories, to accentuate the exact part of the aroma profile that they want to add into the beer to complement the hops and the malt and the yeast and the water profile. And that in itself is amazing. And Germans have been manipulating this yeast for absolute eons, decades. And what I'm left with is a beautiful, sweet, bready, malty beer with a very, very minimal hop profile that is just absolutely packed with yeast esters and yeast complex aromas that follow through into the flavors as well. So if I was just to evaluate this beer from a yeast profile, the clovey, phenolic, gentle, you might perceive this as a smokiness, but the way I perceive this beer is clovey, not very woody, but just the element of warm cloves. that has been put in that beer to really complement the bready sweet aroma profile that you get from the malt, in particular wheat. And you only really get it in German style yeast that has been cultivated for that particular aroma profile that they want for that beer. Light bit of spice intermingled with some very, very profileless stage setting hop. Very, very low bitterness, very, very drinkable, very enjoyable beer. I'm sure if I had 100 different Hefeweizen beers, they'd all have some sort of slight characteristic difference to them. But really, what you get in when you drink one of these beers is brewing tradition, German brewing tradition. Not clean, not neutral yeast, but really flavoursome, ester-filled yeast, esters that remind you of fruit. There's definitely a fruitiness to this beer. It's a fruitiness, but there's no fruit in this beer, so it has to be the yeast. And I love that about German beers. So if you're looking for beer that's packed with flavours, maybe when you're picking up your hoppy Neepers and your double dry hopped quadruple whatevers, maybe you'll slip in a couple of German beers as well. Anyway, that's my view on this beer. Fantastic, absolutely loved it. And I think it's just fair enough to say congratulations to Liverpool winning the league. Man United will be back next year, and Prost, Slancha, and cheers, and it's on to the next one. Cheers, bye bye. And then